The Texans are traveling to Minneapolis, Minnesota, and we're going to talk about all that and more on this edition of The Bullpen.
To throw the punches away. He floats one wide open, and there he goes. Tagged down for a Texan touchdown.
Hello and welcome to The Bullpen. I did not suddenly become a Minnesotan. I just wanted to open the episode like that. So thanks for tuning in. As always, with me is Tom Chavarria. Tom, how are you doing?
It is another opportunity for the Texans to get better this week against the Minnesota Vikings. I'm really excited to see. I believe this is a step up in competition over the first two teams that they faced. So this is really going to be a new measuring stick for the Texans. I think this is a chance to improve off of a week where they probably didn't play their best football on both sides of the football, able to do enough on either side to get a win. But I think Minnesota has played really well, and they're going to have to play better in order to beat Minnesota in their building.
And who'd have thought, right? Coming into this week, I did not expect to be high. I agree with you. I think it's a step up in competition. We'll get more into it, but I definitely thought with Sam Darnold at quarterback that maybe Minnesota would be a little less of a threat, but I hope the Texans are registering how much of a threat Minnesota poses going into this game. As always, before we start, this is The Bullpen. It is a Houston Texans podcast, and if you're listening to this, you probably know that, but in case you didn't, now you do. You can find us wherever you find your podcasts at, and also Locker. There's a Texans Locker League called The Bullpen, $25 buy-in. It is a format of fantasy football that definitely requires some explaining. So at this point, I'd hope that I've put out some sort of video or content to help explain it, but as you know, we record all this on Sunday, and so I know I talked about it on the last episode. I don't want to go too in-depth on what I've done since I haven't done it yet, but I know that I've probably done something to help you guys understand it. Just download the Locker app, search up the league, and sign up. All right. Let's talk about it. I felt like Sam Darnold would probably be more of a Daniel Jones to this Minnesota Vikings offense than a Joe Burrow, if you will. And I'm going to explain that for a second because I feel like it needs some explaining. I thought that maybe Justin Jefferson would play a Malik Neighbors type role where he is the one and he has to get targets, but the Vikings offense wasn't going to be able to move. And I thought that maybe that would be what the Texans could anticipate facing. It feels more like Sam Darnold is like realizing a Joe Burrow level of potential because of the talent that's in the receiving room for the Vikings. And they don't even have Hawkinson or Jordan. I think Jordan Addison was out last week. He might be out he might be back this week, but that's just a team that it feels like is making Sam Darnold better with the talent that exists, which the Vikings have built talent around Kirk Cousins. And I think that maybe some of us thought that talent wasn't going to be a factor when Kirk Cousins left. And maybe that's not the case now. How do you feel in general about the Texans going into Minnesota? We usually start on the offensive side of the ball for the Texans, but I just really want to know how you feel about what Sam Darnold has done so far for the Vikings and how it affects your view of the Texans' chances against this Minnesota team.
I really feel like Kevin O'Connell is what I think people need to look at and go, this is his effect, right? Sam Darnold has had weapons. He's had opportunities in multiple locations and been unable to really realize this level of talent so far through two games. And I think the direct association is because Kevin O'Connell has made him better. He does have better weapons. I don't think there's too many guys like Justin Jefferson out there. So that does help things. I think Aaron Jones, which a lot of people thought might have been past his prime, is showing people that he's still a very capable running back. And with those tools around him and a pretty solid defense, you're seeing a Vikings team that's able to methodically do stuff. And it's working out for Sam Darnold, where I feel like in seasons past, he was asked to do more, and teams were playing from behind. So you saw him make mistakes that I don't feel he's making for Minnesota so far.
Yeah, yeah. I think that we can look at it that way a lot of times. Like I think obviously as Texans fans, our most direct comparison to that situation is watching what Shane Steichen was able to do with Gardner Minshew last year after Anthony Richardson went down. Obviously, O'Connell comes from the Rams system, was under Sean McVay's offensive coordinator, and was highly touted. One of the better head coaching candidates coming out of his hiring cycle, and has done well with Minnesota, but has also been hit by a lot of issues that kind of derailed that team. So it shouldn't be surprising that we're having this discussion right now, but I think that a lot of people, myself included, kind of filed Kevin O'Connell to the back of their brain and kind of forgot what he did for Minnesota early on in his time as their head coach. And so with that, what in particular about this Minnesota offense scares you the most in terms of like how it stacks up to what the Texans do on defense?
Well, I mean, we've spoken in past episodes, or at least I have, about the corners maybe not being as effective as they were highly touted coming into the season. And Justin Jefferson, while coming off of a quad contusion, says he'll be ready to go for week 3, is a nightmare for corners. I mean, he's just a lot to handle. He's a big guy. He can go up and make plays. He runs really good routes. I mean, he does everything you want in a prototypical number 1 wide receiver. He's the Nico Collins for the Minnesota Vikings. So where you see Nico carve up these defenses, this is what Justin Jefferson's done. In 2 games, he's went for 192 yards. He had 133 yards before getting injured in 3 quarters or less than 3 quarters in last Sunday's game. So that's a guy that you really have to circle in red. The next guy I feel like is Aaron Jones, who's being able to do it in the rushing game and in the receiving game. He's 3rd on the team in receiving yards with 51 receiving yards. So it's going to be a lot to ask of the linebacker room to be able to keep Aaron Jones in check. And these are the 2 guys that set the table for what Minnesota wants to do on offense.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. And I think that with the Texans' performance as a run defense, I'm slightly less concerned about Aaron Jones. But then you bring, like you said, into perspective the fact that he's a threat as a receiver, and that kind of gives us reason to be concerned. You have to hope that Toa has figured out coverage. I haven't really, like I said, I think that I said it last episode that I think that just like with Petrie, that Toa's usage, is probably what has fixed his shortcomings. And so maybe the Vikings will aim to put him in a position to be exploited in a coverage situation in order to try and take advantage of that. But I mean, I have to agree with you that off the top, I mean, Justin Jefferson is the clear and apparent threat, and we would need a legacy game from Derek Stingley to neutralize that. And I would anticipate based off, so usually the Texans play splits, and one corner has one side of the field, the other corner has the other side. They have in the past been known to break that when needed. Amari Cooper lit up the Texans last year during the regular season, and then they shadowed him with Derek Stingley in the playoffs, and obviously those 2 games had very different results. I would anticipate that the Texans should at least consider placing Derek Stingley on Justin Jefferson duty for the duration of the game. But we'll see how that goes. For me, one of the things that would worry me is if Jordan Addison was to come back from injury. That would give us 2 legitimate threats at wide receiver, which would mean that at some point Lassiter would be actually challenged. And now I am a firm believer in Lassiter's capabilities. I just, as with most people, the actual moment that you are tested or that the person you believe in is tested in their ability is obviously not the best moment unless they come out on top, in which case then it's great. But overall, that's probably the most concerning part for me about the Vikings offense. Now, as far as the Vikings defense goes, there's some familiar faces. We've got Blake Cashman, Jonathan Grenard. which one of those two players do you believe poses the biggest threat to what the Texans do offensively?
For me, I really feel like it's Blake Cashman, and the reason being is because I feel like Jonathan Grenard's going to be accounted for by Laramie Tunsil. And Laramie Tunsil, while he does have a clear and present problem with at least generating one false start per game, you're going to get it. It's kind of like Justin Verlander and the single homer. Just go ahead and chalk that up. He's very good against opposing pass rushers. So I feel like that is something that, he kind of plays up to that level. I think it'll be interesting going against Jonathan Grenard again. I'm sure they did it in practice so many times. So that chess game is going to be really interesting to watch. But Blake Cashman, I think, is going to be somebody that is probably going to have a big effect on what the run game wants to do. I think, obviously, if we're trying to get some of the running backs involved in the passing game, that's probably their best cover linebacker. So winning that battle against Blake Cashman is going to be really important for the Houston Texans.
I have to go with Jonathan Grenard, and it's mostly because you went with Blake Cashman, but I will explain. You did make a good point that Laramie Tunsil probably locks down Jonathan Grenard, but I think that maybe the Vikings move Grenard around and get him into matchups with the rest of the Texans offensive line, which I think is less of a sure thing. And so it'll be interesting to see if Grenard flashes, what he had shown as a Texan in the matchup with the Texans. We'll call it the Jonathan Grenard revenge game. We'll call it the Blake Cashman revenge game. No real revenge, I guess, on either part, outside of the fact that the Texans maybe didn't offer the amount of money they believed that they were worth as players, or maybe didn't offer them a contract at all. But the past is in the past. So anyway, let's look at it from the offensive perspective for the Texans. What do you think that CJ needs to do? We've obviously talked about how his performances thus far have been not unimpressive, right? They are less than impressive through the lens of being an elite quarterback, but overall we've chalked it up to developmental adjustments, getting used to this season. And so this is probably the earliest stage we could expect a CJ Stroud breakout game if this is the conditions that they want to set up for it. What do you think are the factors that need to fall into place for us to see a CJ Stroud masterclass?
I think he's got to get all the other weapons involved. Clearly, he's been able to do what he needed to do with Nico Collins, whether it be in the scramble drill or just flat out putting him on an island one-on-one with their best corner and going to work. But until he can fully incorporate Stephon Diggs and Tank Dell to a level in which we're talking about them, either scores or yardage, I think you're still going to be limited, where right now you're going to get out of the box. I think CJ is going to roll out of bed and throw for 265 yards on, 60% completions for one or two scores. But to get to that, 350 yards, 4 touchdown, elite echelon quarterback level, he's going to have big games from all of his targets. And I think that's where the next evolution is for this offense.
No, yeah. I think that getting everyone involved is a big part of it. I'd say on top of that, it kind of falls in the same category, but I mostly talk about wide receivers. I think that the tight end room finally having their breakout. Obviously, the Texans paid Dalton Schultz all that money for a reason. To see him get more involved in the passing game than he's been to this point would be nice. Obviously, last season it took him a second to kind of adjust to the offense. This is a season where he is coming off of having been in the offense previous season. So I would hope that it takes a little less time for him to get integrated to being involved more in this offense. Although, I guess if you get the other receivers involved, maybe Dalton Schultz's role shifts away from that a little more. But in general, I agree with you, but I wanted to extend the invitation out to the tight end room to figure it out as well. As far as the running room goes, do you think that maybe we see closer to what we saw against the Bears or the Colts when it comes to the Texans running back situation?
I think that really depends on who's RB2. I think while Joe Mixon should be the lead back. If he's not, then that's definitely going to make things totally different. Obviously, we don't know the extent of the ankle injury. He was able to come back in limited duty, but then towards the end of the game, you saw Cam Akers until he let go of the rock, and then you saw Dario Bungawale on the entire last drive, which made me wonder if, not that they lost faith in Cam, but, really wanted to give somebody else a turn and see if, the numbers would be better. If Joe Mixon's running the rock like he was in week 1, then it doesn't matter who RB2 is. If Joe Mixon is, not utilized in the same vein, then I think RB2 matters a lot. And while Cam Akers put the football on the ground in an instance where a guy made a great play, put his helmet directly on the football, I still love what Cam Akers was able to do. And I think that if Dameon Pierce is not healthy, he needs to be the guy.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you there. I don't think that one fumble should be held over Cam Akers' head. I think that maybe we meet in the middle. We find a middle ground for this Texans run offense. I'd like to see them consistently as a group produce over 100 yards rushing, just because that's, from a stat sheet perspective, nice. But what I'd really like to see, I think, has more to do with the offensive line. And I think that just is really what has more to do with the entire group is one, Juice Scruggs returning, but two, this offensive line producing great pockets for CJ Stroud in the passing game, but also getting back to what they were doing week 1 in terms of giving Joe Mixon or whoever's back there, right, the run lanes that they need to be able to produce in the way that they do. Because I feel like maybe that was the deeper issue this past week, was the offensive line was a little off their game. And Jarrett Patterson did a good job in relief, and I think in the short term he's a great solution at center, but it'd be great to have Juice Scruggs back, in my opinion. Let's move into our score prediction segment of the show. Tom, I want you to go first. What are your thoughts? Well, obviously, I think both of our views of this matchup have changed with the emergence of Sam Darnold and Justin Jefferson being BFFs now and throwing 97-yard touchdown passes. So what are your thoughts?
I do believe that Minnesota is going to provide a difficult task for the Texans defense. I do believe they're going to be able to move the football. I do believe they're going to be able to score points. I also believe that the Texans defense will force Minnesota into some turnovers. I think that's what we're seeing early on, is that they can get after the quarterback. I think if Caleb Williams doesn't do a phenomenal job of scrambling in last week's game, there's probably a fumble, a strip sack in there somewhere. I don't believe Darnold will be able to do that. However, he has rushed for 35 yards in 2 games, so he has been willing to run a little bit. So with all that being said, I feel like the Texans offense shows up as we feel like they would. I feel like Minnesota is very, very game, but I think the Texans find a way to get it done. I think they're gonna prove Vegas wrong where they proved them right in this last time out. I think they win a high-scoring game, 31-21.
Nice. No, yeah, I like that one. I'm going to go a little closer than you, although I think I'm within range. I'm within the same sort of area as you. I agree that that the Vikings maybe, Darnold's shown the ability to run a little bit, but maybe isn't as elusive as Caleb Williams. I'm going to give the Vikings offensive line a little credit, so I think that might cancel out a bit of it's not going to be quite what we saw with the Texans beating up Caleb Williams for 60 minutes, but it could be pretty bad for Sam Darnold unless he gets a little more elusive. I'm going to go with 27-24. I think this is a game that should be within a field goal, but should also be decently high scoring. I don't know if you can call 27 and 24 high scoring numbers, but I think that the combined over 50 gives me the impression of a high scoring game. It'll be back and forth. It'll be tough. I mean, I'll move right into the storybook ending for this one, since there is a storybook ending for this one. And I think so. The easy choice is to go with, and the Texans move into field goal range with 3 seconds left, and Kaimi Fairbairn kicks a field goal in the dome, which is where he does really well, is inside domes, and puts it away. But I'm going to go with a little bit more of a tougher one. So the Texans, it's been back and forth. About 2 minutes left at the 2-minute warning roundabout. It's like a little more time than you'd want to give CJ Stroud. Sam Darnold hits Justin Jefferson on like a long pass. It's like the Vikings were set and primed to run the clock, score, and tie it. And instead, with 2 minutes left, like as the 2-minute warning hits, Justin Jefferson hits like a 60-yard touchdown. And the Texans are now down 24-20. And the Vikings kick the ball to the Texans. It goes out the back of the end zone, set up at the 30-yard line. And it's touchdown or nothing. And the Texans, the run game has been serviceable all day. So as you can imagine, having all 3 timeouts, the Texans throw a couple runs in there to try and get the clock down. Initially, the Vikings call a timeout in hopes to like maybe stall the clock. They fumble that pretty bad, like the way that they approach it. And it becomes a thing where the Texans are now in field goal range. It's like a long field goal, but they are in range on a 3rd and 10 at like the 40-yard line of the Vikings. And CJ drops back and Tank is darting across the field on a deep slant coming in. And CJ hits him with the ball, and Tank, like stick and move, just hits a cut and just jukes a guy out of his shoes. And the safety catches him at like the 15-yard line. And the Texans still have plenty of timeouts, so they call a timeout. There's like 20 seconds left, and then on the next play, the Texans run a jet sweep reverse kind of thing with Stephon Diggs, and Diggs gets a rushing touchdown with like 15 seconds left. And then the kickoff, the Vikings get the ball, they don't do anything with it, and the Texans win. So, yeah, that's my storybook ending. I try to be a little bit vague so that I can claim that I'm right when it's close. But definitely I think the rushing touchdown from Stephon Diggs is what makes it the most unrealistic, in my opinion. But I have to give it an unrealistic twist. Otherwise, it's just a regular ending and not a storybook ending.
I mean, knowing that the clock is like against them, timeouts are not, the fact that they would think to run a jet sweep, with the clock coming down seems really unrealistic. But if you're right,
they have their timeout. So like they've called a timeout. They have another one. There's 20 seconds left. They run a jet sweep because they're like, well, we can run it because we kind of want to get some time off the clock. It's just like the Vikings did earlier in the storybook ending where they were like, oh, well, we'll throw it deep because we want to get a little closer to get into field goal range. And then Jefferson is like wide open. Like the secondary like fails to show up in any way to stop him. And
which corner are you talking about? Put that on wax.
I plead the fifth. I will not disclose the corner I'm talking about Mike Ford. But yeah, there it is, the storybook ending. Tom, do you have anything more to say about this matchup before we kind of bring this thing to a close?
I'm really excited for it. I feel like this is a win that if the Texans can get it, it'll really solidify their place amongst the elites in the NFL early on. I think right now people are still in a wait and see moment with the Texans. There's you still got guys like Nick Wright that just do not want to believe in the Texans, want to bet against them, just thinks they're overhyped and not to the level.
It's wild that he's the one who's pushing that, since he literally went from like the Houston beat, like the Houston ESPN radio host, to ESPN. So, I mean, I don't know. It don't make no sense at all to me.
But yeah, I want guys like that to just have to eat the crow. And I think the Texans going into Minnesota, getting a win and doing it kind of convincingly, if it does go the way I sell it, even though after I gave my prediction, I went and looked up the early Vegas line. The Vikings are a 3-point favorite. So it's kind of a pick 'em because you get that for them being the home team. So I believe that that's saying that it's a coin flip in Vegas's eyes. The over-under is 46.5, which is kind of within the realm where we're at. I think that might go up over the week. It just depends on injuries. Obviously, Justin Jefferson came out of the last week with a quad contusion, so that changes things. Mixon being nicked up, that changes things. I think if all things are equal, it's probably a higher scoring game because those are two really good offenses, even though no one saw that, from Minnesota before the season started. So looking forward to being able to talk about the Texans getting some national love. And to do that, they got to beat the Minnesota Vikings in their building.
Yep, a Sunday night football win, and it's back to the noon time slot the very next week and for the next several weeks. I believe the next non-noon game the Texans have is actually not Thanksgiving, Halloween. I could be wrong on that. But yeah, I mean, I echo the sentiment that you have towards it. I'm excited for it, cautiously optimistic. Ready to see some Texans football again. It never gets old. Each week I'm just like, football's back. Football is back. This week the Texans are back. So I'm ready to watch that play out. And yeah, thanks for tuning into the Bullpen. This has been a Houston Texans podcast. And so as much, you should probably know that is what we are if you got here. But if you don't, that is what we are. So you invite us wherever you find your podcast. Tom is at Third Coast Tom on Twitter and at TCTom1 on Instagram. And I am at James Roy NFL on Twitter and at N1 Texans fan on Instagram. You can find the Bullpen on socials at the Bullpen Cast, although it's not on TikTok because why would it be? I don't know. I'm barely on TikTok. So why would we have a Bullpen page on TikTok? Anyways, thanks for tuning in. As always, stay classy, Houston, and vamos Texans. Thanks for tuning into The Bullpen, a Texans podcast. Please like, comment, subscribe, and follow along for more Texans talk from The Bullpen.